Joining me this morning to talk a little bit about the Aztec Museum and Pioneer Village. The acting director of the Aztec Museum and Pioneer Village, Joan Monninger, is back with me here at KSJE. Welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Scott.
Good to have you here. And it is really one of the unique gems of the area to be able to go exploring through the Pioneer Village and the Aztec Museum. And so I'm sure as you have kind of gotten to the area and gotten to know it, you've been noticing some of these things that make it so unique, this facility, right?
Yes.
That you now find yourself acting director of.
Yeah. Well, actually, my older son, who's in college studying history and digital media, we went out there last summer, and he filmed it he has a YouTube channel that he does archiving.
I think I saw that on YouTube, okay. Right? He made a YouTube video on it.
He is right. Who's Your Boo? So who's your boo?
Okay.
My son is your boo.
Okay.
And so who's your boo? And we were out there filming, and I had no idea that a year later I'd be its acting director, but we loved it. I mean, you have the historical collections in the main building, and then you have this entire grounds right there off of Main Street in Aztec with at least, I think it's like 15 separate buildings we have.
Right.
So, yeah, it is a gem.
Yeah, very much so. And so I'm glad we got a chance to talk a little bit about it today and show people, again, folks who are watching on video, some of the pictures and images of the buildings and things that we're talking about here at the Aztec Museum. But as you mentioned, it is literally in downtown Aztec because the museum is the old City Hall.
Yes, it is the old City Hall. There's twin buildings that were built around 1940, and so there's the firehouse, which houses the Historical Society. So we love our friends over at the San Juan County Historical Society.
Right, separate entity right there
separate
next door.
entity, but shout out to them because they're fantastic. And then we are the museum next door, so we're in the other building.
Right.
We have 2 floors of collections, and then you move out into the village behind it, which has, like I said, different buildings. Some actually buildings that were moved onto the property. So like the old Aztec jail is the original 1910 Aztec jail.
Nice.
It's on our site.
Exactly. So a lot of these buildings are actually historical structures that have been moved to this location.
Some are literally the building like that. The Cedar Hill Chapel Church is there. It's been cut down to size, to scale a little bit, but basically it's that building. And actually we're getting ready to have a wedding there in July.
Nice.
People are able to rent the facilities for that.
Okay.
Some folks come back and renew their vows that were actually married there many years ago.
Right.
When it was at Cedar Hill, which is neat.
That is kind of cool.
Some of the other buildings that we have were taken from other old buildings. They're reconstructed, and we kind of made them something else to represent what village life, kind of community life would have been like. So you have the magistrate's office, a grocery store. And then other buildings, like I said, are the actual building. Hamlet Cabin is one of them, which I think is really neat because it is the actual 1880 cabin that was moved to the site. My understanding is it was between maybe Farmington and Bloomfield, where it originally was, and they are some of the original Anglo settlers to the area. So interesting stories tied with all of them.
Sure, and lots of different, just by experiencing it, by wandering through, and you get to kind of go into the buildings and look at them and see just how large they were or how small they were, and how they functioned.
Certainly. When you step inside the Hamlet Cabin and you see that a whole family lived in this one-room cabin with its dirt floor, you get a pretty good appreciation for what life was like in the 1880s.
Right.
Later on, if you go to our farmhouse, which represents more early 20th century, so 1920s-ish, what a prosperous house would have looked like.
Maybe a little more creature comforts, but just
barely.
A
little more creature comforts, but still you're looking at 2 bedrooms and, kind of a parlor in that. That one was completely built just to look like what it would have been. So we have that mix of authentic old buildings with the newer ones. And everything has some kind of tie to San Juan County and more so to Aztec. And every building is full of items from our collection. We
those historical artifacts or whatever people would have used in that era, you've kind of placed in those structures when you have them.
Yeah, we have everything from like stuff that's in the grocery store to the tinsmith, and we have the Farmington Hustler Press
the
in
newspaper,
one of the buildings, the newspaper press
that's
there.
Right. Okay.
And, we have the press there. And then we have...
The printing press.
Yeah, printing press.
Right.
And we're looking at, hopefully maybe this summer or fall, doing some demos with that. We have Mr. Garrison who has done them in the past. We're hoping to bring him back in. Again, as we're bringing the museum back to life after COVID and
well,
shut
sure.
down.
Well, that's another good point, is that you had to shut
yeah.
down like everyone when we couldn't gather, and so to be safe. And so this is kind of the exciting reopening, if you will, of the museum in the Pioneer Village, right?
That's
and so,
part of why I'm here today with you,
right.
is really to talk to folks about that and let them know the museum is open, and we want visitors, and we want members, and we want volunteers, everybody coming out. And like I said, we're going to work on some programming. We're hoping Devin Neely might work on the printing press too. He has an interest in that.
I bet he is.
And
I'm not
so
surprised.
bring in members of the community who have some kind of demonstrable skill that they can share that relates to the community, and how do we interpret the past and make it come alive for folks,
Right. Right. It's not just a story in a book or something. It actually, these people actually lived and used these items and produced things, and it's very different for them the way we are now. In fact, one of the photos you sent me, here's one of the jail you talked about, right? We can kind of see it there on the right-hand side.
And the caboose in the background.
Yes, of course.
Which, that one was rebuilt. That was Ray Atchison, who their family worked on that.
Okay. A lot of folks may not remember that we had a train. Aztec had a train.
Exactly.
It came all the way to Farmington from Durango. And so, that was a big part of this community's history as well, to import and export goods and fruits and vegetables and things that we grew here in the San Juan Basin.
Yeah, anytime you talk about the history of a place, you're looking at transportation, right? You can get folks out there, sometimes in very difficult ways, and you can grow, all the produce in the world.
Right.
For a long time, there were orchards all around here, all the apples in the world. If you can't get them to markets, not going to do you any good.
Right.
So transportation is key. And, as everyone knows, roads out here are rough.
True. And 100 years ago,
even
or
rougher.
150 years ago, they were even rougher. And I can't recall. I remember there were stories about the New Mexico State Fair in Albuquerque, and there was always a fruit exhibit from San Juan County, and it usually got there by rail, but it had to go north to Durango, east to, I think, Pueblo, and then south to Albuquerque, and it still got there suitably fresh to display. And everyone was amazed that this fruit from the wilds of San Juan County in the far northwest corner of the territory could arrive at the fair looking so freshly picked.
Yeah, and beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes.
So anyway, there's a long rambling story.
No, it's a good story. Those are all good stories, because actually the ladies in the county put together a display that was at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, which is a tremendous deal.
Another thing, right?
Yeah.
How long did that take to get them there, right?
Yeah,
Probably
but they
several
did,
days.
and it was a beautiful boost for the county and what they were doing here.
The area was well known for its fruit back in those days when the farms were growing, and so that's one of the things we have from part of our history. So that's what people can learn about at the Aztec Museum in Pioneer Village. I want to show these other pictures and just talk briefly about them, because
let's do that.
They're really interesting. Here is the Justice of the Peace and the Police Magistrate's office, right? Now, this building looks original to me.
That one, oh gosh, and here I'm going to prove how new I am. That's okay. You can stop me with questions. I think
it certainly is old.
Part of the structure is older, I believe. But again, there's each of these buildings, and each of them is full of artifacts.
Right.
But what I'm really happy about was 2 weeks ago was when we opened, and so these are some of our first visitors.
Yay!
And, I know a couple of them were from California. A couple of them they were visiting friends here in Aztec. So
there you go.
We love it when local folks bring visiting folks out to the museum.
Right. And if you haven't been there in a while, I think it's time for a trip back, locals, to come check it out.
Absolutely.
And the background of this picture is the chapel, I think, that we were talking about earlier,
the chapel,
right?
Yeah,
so you see it in the background.
Chapel is right there in the background.
There you go. Another overview of some of the other grounds.
Yeah, and some of the equipment. We have a lot of agricultural equipment, so we have folks that kind of come in, and again, I haven't been with the museum that long, but it's nice folks come in. It's like, oh, I remember either using something like that, or my grandparents had something like that.
Right.
And we love those kind of wow and nostalgic moments of connection.
Sure. Very much so. Well, and again, if you're on a modern farm today, that equipment is very different from what we're using these days.
Yes.
And to see how it all came together.
We had our first school groups last week. So
nice.
We had groups in from Pagosa Springs, and they're running around, checking out all the buildings. Inside in our Lobato room, we have a whole display of old cameras. And so it was really fun as one of the young boys was down there, and he's taking pictures with his cell phone.
Right.
Of this collection of old cameras, and he just was like astounded by it.
Thing
He's
just
like,
to
"Look
take
at all
pictures,
these."
not to make calls?
He's got a computer,
Right.
keeps the computer in his pocket with it happens to have a camera on it, and he's using it to take a picture of all these bulky cameras as they evolved over the years.
Right. Fascinating. Very, very cool. Another picture of the grounds of the
Yep.
Pioneer Village in Aztec, part of the Aztec Museum, of course. And again, as you mentioned, you've got about 15 buildings. And so that's a constant, I guess,
Yes.
struggle with your volunteers, because really you really don't have a large staff. It's really a volunteer
No.
organization.
You don't have much staff at all.
But the wind and the sand, and it kind of takes a number on any building that's out in the elements.
We are in a constant battle with the elements out there, and trying to keep the buildings in good condition. Try not to do anything, especially with some of the older wood, that damages it.
Right,
we have to
sure.
be very careful of what products we use.
Right.
We have a woman out now who's been helping us do a lot of the work around there, rebuilding some ramps. When you have a lot of wood, you have a lot of rot.
Sure.
So it is this constant upkeep, and so we do need help
Right.
all the time with doing that.
Great. But folks can volunteer and pick the
Folks
kind of
can
the task that's
volunteer.
comfortable for them and
Yes.
how they'd like to help, right?
And we do actually even have a building where, a program where people can adopt a building. And so if they want to come out like once a month with the
Okay.
family and do kind of a cleanup, again, as we all know, the winds here were
Right.
particularly strong throughout the month, which I understand is not necessarily usual.
Yeah, it's
but
been a
it
little stronger than usual.
It meant a lot of dust, even after we did a big community-wide cleaning day, and we had folks out,
Right.
already. We've got a fresh layer of dust over
Yes,
everything.
well, that is New Mexico in the spring, unfortunately. But there you go. But some great pictures from the Aztec Museum in Pioneer Village that we wanted to share with you this morning as we talk a little bit about it. Here's the one of the schoolhouses, right?
And this is a newer building that was built to look like a schoolhouse.
Gotcha.
And Larry, who also is on our board, we have an all volunteer board of directors. We're 501c3, and they actually govern the
How
museum.
it runs and
yes.
right.
And Larry is on that board, and he also does a lot of work on the grounds. And each day he'll come and he'll erase. I don't know if you have the blackboard picture in there.
Hey, right there.
But there it
he'll
is. Erase whatever the kids have written that day, and he
Okay.
really always enjoys mostly enjoys seeing what they write on there.
Kids.
And sometimes you get some surprises.
Right. I was just thinking about that
overall-
when I put this photo together about how today I don't know if we have a blackboard in any school.
No, they
in
might
the
have a
county.
whiteboard.
Maybe a whiteboard,
but
right?
not chalk.
But this
and
is the
blackboard.
old-
And we actually have the little chalk easels on each of the desks in there too. So, and the kids love coming out and
Oh, sure.
doing stuff with that.
Yeah, but again, it's just something that's not used anymore, at least today, here locally. I'm sure there are some schools in the country that still have a blackboard, but not too many here.
Certainly not in a one-room schoolhouse.
Right,
Like,
very true. And you can kind of see how that all came together. And another shot from the doorway looking out at the Pioneer Village, and then this is the barbershop.
Yeah, this was Ray Current donated this early on, I guess. The Currents had a barbershop in Aztec from the early 1900s, I think around the 1960s.
Okay.
And
All those chairs and those
you
sinks
got
are definitely
cedar
well
backboards.
used.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is, and they put together a whole display down there. And what's interesting is we still every week we get calls or emails or drop-ins from folks who have items to donate. And so recently someone had it was a barber's mirror, silver-plated mirror,
Okay.
not in great condition, but a shaving
Right,
set
right.
that she thinks is tied to that barber shop. And
Oh,
so
interesting.
we're doing a little research on that. And
Okay.
it's
To
always
decide
fun.
if it would be good to add to the collection
Yeah,
or not.
I think we're going to
sure.
go ahead and session it, but we have a committee that looks at that. We want to know that there's a tie to the Aztec community, and we need to know that we have somewhere either to put it or store it.
Well, that's an important thing, too, and that's a concern for every museum, I think, too,
Yes.
right? To be able to say, we'd love to take these great artifacts, but we also need to store them properly so that they don't deteriorate any further, or we can care for them, or those types of things.
Yes,
So
exactly.
that's very important.
Oh, you see the salt and pepper shaker, and for those on the radio listening, you can't
Right,
see it,
but they should be
the salt
watching.
and pepper shaker collection is also.
That's on the shelf
waiting.
behind
Yeah,
in
it
the
is.
background that we see. Got it. Very good. And I want to keep going here. A couple more outdoor photos here of some of the other.
More farm implements
Right.
and equipment.
There you go. Very good. And then I want to back up just a minute because I think then the next pictures are going to be on the concert, which we're going to talk about later. But I want to talk about the museum building because that's where some of your more maybe permanent exhibits are and other things that are there that people can go and see. And I know there's quite a collection of clothing these days, right?
Yeah, well, thanks to one of our board members, Dana Reed, and she likes to work on usually one exhibit a year, something new that we can have upstairs, something new to welcome folks in. And so right now we have one that is mid-century clothes and hats. And some of these are from our collection there at the museum, and then others are her own private collection.
Okay.
And she has some great pieces, including this floral dress that she wore, in the late 60s, early 70s, including the daisy wreath that her husband made for her.
Is that it?
To wear. That is it.
That's the one?
He's got it up right now. And
See?
I love that piece. And she's put so much time and effort into putting this exhibit together. And so we're really happy about it. We have a thing about the little black dress and Coco Chanel and kind of win that up. And he brought that one up too.
There it is, see?
All kinds of
Right.
things. And then I know before you flashed the picture of the patio dresses, so the fiesta dresses.
Right.
And I love these because I was not familiar with these. And so I got to do a little more extra research on them. And these really come out of the 1940s and 50s. And Dolores Gonzalez out of Tucson, Arizona. It's resort wear. And so she took influences from Mexico as well as indigenous influences, and she made these beautiful sets, usually a dress or a skirt and a blouse that would have these wonderful patterns on them. And we have a nice collection. I think it was Tweety Blansett who donated most of those or loaned them out. And they were really kind of the first big Southwestern style that kind of became mainstream across the country.
Okay.
And then that morphs, by the time you get into the Midwest, into what we associate with square dancing dresses in the 1950s.
Okay.
They lose some of that Southwest patterns, but they still have kind of what is like a broomstick skirt that will spin really nicely.
Right, as you're twirling around.
And look, elegant and beautiful. But I love this because it really speaks to Southwestern style.
Right.
And it brings in those indigenous and Hispanic elements.
Right. And of course, if I remember my history correctly, during that era, there was a lot of growth, I think, in this region.
Yes.
Of course, in the 1950s, certainly there was a lot of growth in this area because of the oil and gas. But even prior to that, at post-World War II, I think a lot of people were discovering the Southwest and cities like Phoenix and Tucson and Albuquerque.
And then you begin to have Route 66 come through.
That's right. That's right. A lot
So
of
that
folks were
whole
using that mother road to
tourism
go
boom,
west.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. So very cool. And it's cool that you have some of these actual dresses to display and the stories that go along with them, too.
Yeah, and that's what, and we have literally thousands of things in our collections as I'm discovering and going through some of the records. Just thousands of items, and each of them have some kind of story tied to them.
Right.
And so it's really marvelous. And then, that shows you there's literally something that's going to pique the interest of everyone who comes and visits us.
I would think that would be true, because you have a lot of things, including seashells.
Yes, these natural history
wait a minute.
items. Yes, right?
Joan, we're in the middle of the desert.
So I'm told.
Give me the connection.
Yeah. So the connection with that is Willie Lobato donated these. He is from the Largo Canyon area.
Right.
Got a family and a ranch out there, and he leaves the area, but he keeps kind of coming back and forth. But he goes out into the world and he's collecting these things.
Okay.
And so he and the family, and I can't remember now his wife's name, donated this collection to the museum. And so early on, this becomes one of the core collections of the museum is the Lobato. So this is the Lobato room.
Okay.
And we have this wonderful exhibit that features geology and, the shells, these beautiful shells.
Right.
But
Gorgeous.
that then segues over to one of my favorite artifacts that has piqued my interest recently is this bowl that we have. And I think, and to describe it to your listeners.
Right.
So this is it's a black on gray, what they call Mesa Verde bowl, and I'm still learning about these things.
Mm-hmm.
So this
About
comes
1200 to 1300.
1100, 1200 to 1300 AD. When you have these the Pueblo civilizations kind of across the continent, or not across the continent, but in this area, up in Mesa Verde, where Aztec ruins are, and
Salmon and Chaco Canyon.
so
all
many
those.
folks that come through, they're going to visit Aztec ruins, which is amazing.
Right.
And then they're going to come hopefully to the Aztec Museum, and we see a lot of that happening already. And so we love our friends over at Aztec ruins. But this pot comes from that Abrams, who at one point early before 1900 owned the land where Aztec ruins are. It was H.D. Abrams. His family donated this large collection of items from Aztec ruins. So it is these Pueblo society who made this. But what's unique about this bull is that it has this wave pattern.
Right.
And
that's what I was going to ask you about.
That's in the inside of it in black is this wave pattern that you see. You see it down on like down in Peru when I was down there. You see this on things in places that are adjacent to the water.
Yeah.
You see it coming out of ancient Greece and the Romans. They call it the Vitruvian wave over in Italy. But it's there on this piece that is in the middle of the desert at Aztec ruins where this is found. And so that, what does that tell you about trade routes and how these, again, this huge pre-Columbian civilizations that are across North and South America and trade routes. And so there are shells that were found. I know in Mesa Verde they found seashells there. We have this beautiful bowl that has that just little insight into the history of the past and the trade routes maybe, or maybe somebody saw something, but they a long time ago, and they managed to put this pattern on the bowl. And so I'm completely fascinated with this one bowl among all these bowls that we have.
Sure. But really interesting and unique, because I don't think we see too many of them with this particular design or pattern.
No.
And so that's one thing. And then, as you mentioned, the trade routes, which have been kind of well documented about, the shells that you find at Chaco Canyon or here at Aztec or salmon ruins, or the parrot feathers, I think, is another thing, too, that aren't only found in maybe Central America. And so how did they get here?
They
Obviously,
make their way up here.
Some trading and some things that were going on, which is pretty extensive when you think about it. And the transportation, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, it took a long time to get from place to place, and even more so in 1100, 1200. And so it may take months to trade things back and forth, but they had great value, I would imagine, for some of those folks because of how rare they were in this area.
And this is what we call this is a food bowl. So some family utilized this at Aztec ruins when they lived there.
Sure.
Sure.
And now it's preserved, thankfully, for all of us to see at the Aztec Museum, which we're so grateful for. So that is very wonderful. Joan Monninger is my guest this morning. She is the acting director of the Aztec Museum in Pioneer Village, which is kind of reopening after the pandemic, and we're so thrilled that the museum has been able to reopen with the help of a lot of your volunteers and dedicated folks that really put their love, sweat, and tears, I think, into that facility and keep it going.
Yeah, that's an apt description, because there is a lot of love, sweat, and tears that goes into maintaining the museum. We have such a devoted core group of volunteers who are out there almost every day. Just opening requires going around and unlocking each of these buildings.
Right.
So there's JR.
Very true. Very true. Let's talk about your volunteers. Speaking of volunteers, right? JR Sykes is one of your volunteers, a board member.
He is a board member, and then a volunteer who's out there and always helpful.
He's usually doing something with audiovisual or something.
Yes, especially for the concerts. I don't know. Do we want to go ahead and talk about the concerts?
Let's talk about those. Yes, we do. That's why I was wanting to show the picture. But you had your first concert last week, I believe, right?
Yes.
And so they are the second Fridays of the month.
They are the second Fridays of the month at 7 p.m. and they're out on our grounds under our big sort of shed that we have out there for that. We have a new stage out there, concrete stage. It's all still very rustic. We are a Pioneer Village. It's the Pioneer Village, right? Exactly.
You don't have a box seat necessarily, but some great music and great entertainment. This is, of course, wonderful Aztec natives, Hoyle Osborne, and of course
Jane Voss.
Jane Voss. Well, I don't know why her name escaped me there. I've known her forever, but a great act, great entertainment. So they kicked off the season, but you've got different entertainment coming up, right?
And Hoyle really helped spearhead this along with Debbie Klein on our board. And they worked with the Connie Gotch Foundation to get funding for us to be able to do these concerts again. They started them last year, and because you were a part of a really wonderful one. The one that I got to last year happened to be the one that you were performing in.
That's true.
It was Hope Not Hate.
That's true.
And
some of the music that composed during the Holocaust, which is a really, it's a really deep cheap concert, but really interesting and inspiring music, I would say.
It was, and
stories.
Really moving. So, we're not doing that one this year. We have we've got the next one. So in June, the second Friday in June is going to be Best Brass of Summer with the glorious Big Brass Ensemble. And then in July, the Badly Bent, which is bluegrass. And then in August, we've got Lone Pinion, which is traditional Hispanic string band music. We're really excited about that one. And then September's the last one. That's the Village Band. But Hoyle and Jane were fantastic, again, because I'm somewhat new to the community. It was my first time hearing them.
Right.
And I was just blown away by how wonderful they were. It was a great concert. Love having people out on the grounds. We've got, kids there to see it, adults there, everyone just enjoying what was essentially a summer evening out on the grounds listening to music at the museum.
There you go. Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, I hope more folks will discover the great space at the Aztec Museum Pioneer Village. And of course, this is kind of the outdoor pavilion, if you will, right? You've got a roof over it, but it's kind of open-sided, and this new stage that folks can now enjoy and check out and enjoy these. These are free concerts, by the way, right?
These are free concerts. If folks want to give us a donation, we're not going to turn it down.
Right.
But they are free concerts. We really, it's a way of inviting the public into the museum to do something a little different. And the buildings are closed up, but they can still, walk around and see the outsides of them, and you get that sense of what the Pioneer Village is like. And I can't tell you how many people say, I didn't even know all this was back here.
Right.
Right off of Main Street, and all of that is back there.
Very true. But it's a little hard to find, and it's not necessarily hard to find, but you don't necessarily see it from Main Street because it's kind of down a little bit from below Main Street a little bit.
Unless
so if you're not
you come around that park where
the
park is, a lot of times folks don't really know all of that is back there, but literally all of that is back there.
Yeah, right. It's worth finding, right?
Yes.
And worth looking around for it. And so I want to talk a bit about you because you're relatively new to the area, but yet you have a love for history, as I do, and I think when I came to the area, I got involved with the museum here in Farmington. But, I think really important to learn about the place that you are calling home and the stories behind these buildings and the stories behind the industries and how the towns grew the way they did. I find it fascinating, and I imagine you do too.
I do, and I came actually just before COVID, so
it hasn't been all that.
Shut everything down,
years.
And so it was a quiet. I'm actually from Indiana, and at one point, I was in charge of cultural history education at the Indiana State Museum. And then I've also spent a large part of my life at Conner Prairie Living History Park in Noblesville, Indiana. And so coming out here, it was nice once museums began to open up. And some, they were hit really hard with COVID. There's a lot of museums that did not open back up. So last summer, as things began to open up a little, we get to go out a little bit more. Like I said, my son and I were out visiting this one. And I just fell in love with it. And then I got involved with the Farmington Downtown Historical Walk. And so I was putting that on for Kiwanis. So learning a lot of Farmington history.
Sure.
Working very nicely with Bart over at the Farmington Museum, who was a terrific help. Now I've shifted over to Aztec. So they're all that history is kind of tied together here in the county, but it's really fascinating. It's very different because I look at, Indiana. You see a lot of movement into there in the early part of the 1800s, the 1800s. Out here, you're looking at the indigenous history. You had folks here, and then Hispanic history, and especially a little bit more out with the Aztec Museum because we're trying to bring those pieces in. We had a director before COVID. Her name was Natalie, and I don't remember her last name because I never actually got to meet her, but I've read through some proposals that she's done before things shut down. And she really had some great ideas of how do you bring in more with the Hispanic community, because there's a lot of stories there with Blanco, and if I get my pronunciations wrong, I apologize. I'm still learning. Largo Canyon and those areas, the lost communities with Navajo Dam,
they were flooded. That's right, when they built the dam and the reservoir. Sure.
And there's a lot of that history that we haven't really tapped into enough. And now our new board president is Ed Marcus, who grew up out in Blanco. and really has a lot of that history to tell. And that actually, speaking of, is
Right.
one of the things I love there at the Aztec Museum is the walk-ins that we get, or when we're there downtown, and people know each other.
Sure.
They're like, oh, I went to high school with this person. We had a gentleman come in wanting a picture from one of the old yearbooks from Aztec High School.
Okay.
Because his brother had passed away a few years ago, and he wanted a copy of his brother's senior picture. So Ed helped get that book out. Fine. He's like, oh yeah, we went to school with you, and made a photocopy of the picture for this gentleman.
How
And
about that?
We have a lot of just neat stories.
Right. Well, and the history of Aztec, I think, is fascinating, too,
Yeah.
because Aztec is the county seat of San Juan County. It
Interesting
was-
story there.
Interesting
Right.
story. That's right. There was, but for a long time, it was the biggest community in San Juan County, and as I said, it had the railroad, and then it got extended to Farmington, but it ended in Aztec first,
Yeah.
and then it went on to Farmington, and then eventually Farmington grew Aztec, but has a great history of, it was kind of the center
Yeah.
of it all
And
in the county
including
for a long time.
yeah. If you go all the way back to the indigenous connections
Right,
that we
sure.
have there, to the Hispanic connections, to the Anglo connections, the people moving in, the railroad, the oil and gas. One of the first wells, they just put a plaque up near one of those first wells that's
Right,
down the
kinda
street from us.
South of town a little bit.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So, all those important connections of the community with agriculture, with oil and gas,
Right.
the whole shebang.
Right. And there's a lot of, I think, civic pride in Aztec. I meet a lot of
Yeah.
folks who live in Aztec, who love Aztec
Yeah.
and really love to see it thrive. And, they shop local. And
That's
they,
part of our Aztec magic
right.
that we have
That's
there. Our
true.
Aztec magic, and it is a wonderful community. It's a great downtown. We got some beautiful buildings,
Beautiful.
and the museum actually offers a thing for a walking tour of the area, because you really do see what is very much a traditional Main Street,
Right.
with the buildings in that. And there's some new changes coming in. We've got some nice restaurants, and of course we have the museum.
Right, right, which we will go check out and see. So for folks who are watching, we just have a couple of minutes remaining this morning, Joan, but if folks want to support the Aztec Museum, you're online at aztecmuseum.org, and we can become a member.
Yes, you can become a member. We have memberships, and individuals starting at $25, to families for $50, going up to lifetime memberships at $500.
Okay.
And we welcome folks to become members, or just stop by, bring your company out to see us when when you have company visiting. And there is just so much to do in San Juan County, and
Very
you're
true.
among those wonderful things to do.
That's very true. And the museum and the Pioneer Village is open when to
Yes, we are open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
when? Okay. And then, of course, the concert's on the second Friday in the evenings.
Exactly.
There you go. And so the grounds will be open for that.
Yes.
Wonderful. Joan Monninger, thanks for coming in this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you,
Great
Scott.
to visit with you, and great to talk about the history of our community. It's
Yeah,
really-
especially since we both love history. So.
right. It's a great thing. It went by quick. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. From the Aztec Museum in Pioneer Village, my guest here on KSJE.